Great, thanks everyone for joining us today. And we've actually received a really incredibly positive response to these interview series where our senior leaders and subject matter experts share their knowledge and insights on the cooperative model. I'll just admit a few more people who are sitting waiting. These live sessions, as I said, are being recorded and shared with our members and stakeholders, not only here in New Zealand, but internationally. So there's a lot of interest here in terms of what we're doing here in New Zealand. So it's great to have you here. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming Lisa Callagher, Senior Lecturer at Auckland University. Lisa's passionate about the business model, having authored a number of research papers, presented at international conferences, and being part of the team that authored the report on the New Zealand cooperative landscape, which I'm sure all of you have seen. She joins us here today to share her insights from her recent research on producer cooperatives, mobilising collective action towards economic, social and environmental missions. Before I hand over to Lisa, can I ask everyone to mute your microphones? And now over to Lisa. Welcome.
Well, kia ora katoa, everybody. Let me do a screen share. Hopefully you're seeing a set of PowerPoint slides. Thanks for coming and listening to this webinar. Roz and I have talked on a number of occasions about finding ways that academics like me can translate and share some of our insights through different means, because the academic process for publication is kind of a long and arduous one. So I really appreciate, one, the opportunity to share some of the insights, and two, to get some thoughts and feedback from members of the cooperative community. What prompted me to kind of frame up today's topic is around mobilising action towards economic, social, environmental issues, is this hard reality that society faces and that business in general is grappling with at the moment, and that is this issue about how do we change the way we live and be in the world without continually destroying it. And some of the questions around the economic implications of industrial practice in New Zealand are topics that I've had informal conversations with cooperative business leaders at recent events. So what I wanted to do is share with you some of the work that I'm doing with two research teams that I'm involved with, and just to share with you what our thinking and findings are at the moment. So in one group, I work with my colleagues, Frank, Ziad and Stefan, and we are organisational scholars interested in issues around the management and organisation of business. And we're particularly interested in the cooperative model and how it is and how it sits differently from the corporate or the investor-owned model that really dominates a lot of the research and teaching that happens in business schools around the world. The other work I'm doing is with my colleague Elena, who is at University of Auckland. And Elena is an agri-economist who understands agribusiness value chains. So I get a lot of benefit from working with Elena because we have complementary perspectives, but we have different insights. So what I'm hoping to do is kind of pick and choose some of the ideas and insights from across these different research projects to share with you today. So just to put a little bit of context to this issue around kind of the economic, social, and environmental mission, this is a building story here. For 10 or 15 years, we've been talking about the need to grapple with grand challenges. And there are a number of challenges that are pertinent to producer cooperatives around feeding the world, the use of water, land use in general. And the idea of grand challenges is they're very complex, but they are fundamentally solvable. So, so there are things that we can do here. More recently, that discourse has come through the Sustainable Development Goals, which have many parallels with the discussion around grand challenges. And again, we're dealing with a set of complex issues, but through kind of action from multiple players in a more coordinated manner, we can make progress on these issues. Now, in many ways, the economic and social mission that's currently being called for is really the bread and butter for cooperatives. Because if we go back and look at the Rochdale principles, and when we look at the ICA principles and values now, they are explicitly about the economic and social mission of both members as the owners of cooperatives, the staff, and the communities that cooperatives are embedded in. Now, while the environmental mission is not explicit in the cooperative principles, there's clearly ongoing discussion about how that implicit relationship with the environment actually plays out in the way that cooperatives do business, where cooperatives are situated, and in the New Zealand context, the important role that producer cooperatives play both in our economy historically and in the contemporary situation. And of course, it's kind of that concern for economic and social missions that has led a number of multinational organisations such as the United Nations and the World Bank to actually highlight the role that cooperatives can play in grappling with some of these grand challenges and actually making progress on some of the sustainable development goals. Now, of course, action in these areas actually is not about individual organisations operating in isolation. It's really about mobilising collective action. And here I just wanted to put some ideas around what I'm talking about when I talk about collective action. So really what we're talking about here is actually coming up with new solutions that come about because of the collective effort of individuals and organisations. Now, often that collective action needs to happen across individuals and organisations whose values and goals might not necessarily always be aligned. So one of the things that is really challenging when we're trying to make progress in these areas is how we're actually going to create these hybrid practices where we can actually balance off some of the values around the environment along with the values and behaviours of our our prevalent way of doing business. So of course, for cooperatives, that's about bringing the environment alongside people and profit. From a management perspective, we can see that actually there's a couple of things that really matter here. One is about coordinating, actually being able to take expertise or localized knowledge that exist in different parts of the society or different parts of a business system and actually bring that together. And we know that here, knowledge sharing and actually brokering the sharing of knowledge are quite important processes. The other thing we need is actually collaboration. So actually having different actors involved in both the generational creation of ideas, the validation of them, and actually getting them adopted and broadly used. Now, cooperatives in many ways are well positioned for this, but one of the things that we're really aware of is that much of the efforts around collective action so far have had very localized impact. So actually we have really good knowledge about how you get small groups of organizations to work together to make an impact in their local environment. The challenge is how do we actually get the wide scale adoption and changing business practices that is actually going to have the big impact to improve the world. Now, in many ways, cooperatives are well positioned to support that. But at the same time, we also know that for cooperatives, as they grow and their member base grows, often that heterogeneity can create some tensions. We also know that as cooperatives face increasing competition, they have a challenge of maintaining the cooperative values alongside the need to be competitive. So kind of we're trying to bear in mind there's some characteristics of cooperatives that we can recognise that are important for actually mobilising collective action. But at the same time, it's not a straightforward story. So kind of the wide research agenda that kind of I've been working with across my two research groups is this idea about how you actually use these knowledge processes in cooperative and producer cooperatives to support innovation. So I've been working on this for about 7 years. I've done various case studies. We've interviewed over 100 people in producer cooperatives now. We've done series of observations. We've read a lot of documents that are produced by cooperatives, by the industry bodies that cooperatives are are based in, as well as following a lot of the regulatory changes that producer cooperatives are grappling with. So kind of out of that broad umbrella, we've been asking kind of 4 broad questions. First macro question is actually, how do you deal with the tensions of growing, down to more specific questions about how do you get some goal alignment between the needs of the environment, the needs of the cooperative, and the needs of the cooperative members, recognizing that in producer cooperatives, in essence, what we're dealing with is members with their own individual businesses. So in many ways, cooperatives are a business of many businesses. And then what's the role of cooperatives in actually translating and getting wide-scale adoption of some of these hybrid practices that do reconcile the needs for business and the needs for sustainability, down to how are cooperatives actually responding to and engaging with the sustainability goals. So we've kind of got a wide agenda that starts with a wide idea of growth down to some quite focused areas. So kind of bearing in mind that's our wide agenda, there's kind of 4 areas where we've got some insights that we think start to help others understand what role cooperatives play in addressing these. So addressing this environmental mission alongside the economic and social one, and start to think about actually what is it that other cooperatives might consider doing if they're trying to increase their role. So those insights I've got up on your screen now, and I just want to talk to each of them one by one. So this first one about kind of stimulating awareness of environmental challenges and leading to local experimentation is really saying that what our research is showing is that cooperatives are actually playing a really important mediating role in translating some of the macro level challenges that are happening in regards to global consumer shifts and changes in the food and beverage industry at a really global level. Understanding the regulatory environment, not just in New Zealand, but in the markets that New Zealand products end up in, and translating that back to their members in ways that are relevant to the members and the members' daily business. And actually that's quite important in terms of understanding kind of the complexity of those shifts and how it translates back through to what a farmer or an orchardist is doing in their daily business. The other thing that we can see is that cooperatives are actually playing a really important role in reformulating those macro trends and presenting them as opportunities for members to grow the cooperative, rather than maintaining a discourse that this is always a threat and a compliance cost. And actually, if we think about the mindset that you need to take to be able to grapple with some of the things that are happening in the world, you actually need to see the opportunities where you can take action, rather than seeing this as something that you have to defend all the time. So in that regard, cooperatives also are playing a role in actually connecting members who are experimenting and are very entrepreneurial in their outlook with other members who are also kind of the lead users who are trying new things. And in this way, we can see that actually the ways that cooperatives are kind of stimulating that awareness is that there's a common set of tools that many the cooperatives that we study are using. They're making amazing use of their field days. They're adjusting their kind of the communications to their members through newsletters and industry material. The regular meetings with at the board level and with senior management, as well as liaison officers, are actually important tools in doing that translation work. It's actually helping raise member awareness of these issues and getting members to think about how they can respond to this in a more proactive way. The second thing we can see is that cooperatives are actually doing a lot of the orchestration. By orchestration, we actually, thinking about the conductor and the band, kind of coordinating a range of different actors to kind of get to make progress on these areas. So in that regard, the brokering work that's being done in cooperatives is really important in terms of advocating and negotiating for individual members and for the membership as a collective body. In our data, we've got several instances where cooperatives are actually leading a lot of the discussions with industry bodies and regional authorities and doing a lot of the interpretation work on behalf of members, which is actually which the members tell us is a really important function for them. We can also say that brokering work by cooperatives is actually going well beyond the cooperatives as well, into other members of the supply chain, the other research partners, the service providers and the consultants and the like. And that's work that many individual members in their own right couldn't do because it's just such a large task, whereas the cooperatives are actually providing that function. And here we've got, again, it's really clear how cooperatives utilise their existing structures to do that. So in our research, we can see that the use of committees that are made up of cooperative staff and members are really important kind of brokering mechanisms. We can see that task forces are really well utilised as actually developing responses that connect with members. And we can also see that some cooperatives are starting to move towards investment panels to actually help members be part of the decision making about what kind of solutions should be invested in, and actually finding ways to kind of fund and develop that work. So what we can see here is that actually the cooperative's role in actually coordinating and brokering is really crucial in actually finding solutions and validating those solutions in ways that actually can start to say that they're going to make a difference for the environment. They've got the member buy-in, and they make sense for the cooperative as a business. The third area where the cooperatives we think really have the potential to have impact is actually in helping diffuse those proven solutions beyond their cooperative membership and into the industry that the cooperatives operate and beyond. Now, not all cooperatives are going to be positioned to do this, but we can see that some cooperatives are being very effective at kind of sharing their insights into other industries. And we see quite a bit of cross-fertilisation between, say, agriculture and horticulture. And actually some of the manufacturing and packaging and processing industry are learning a lot from the horticulture sector. So there's a lot of cross-industry fertilisation, and much of that is enabled because some of the cooperatives are actively brokering the sharing of knowledge into those industries. So we think actually there's a really good news story here, because actually the role of cooperatives is actually twofold. We've got two dual processes happening at the same time. From an innovation process, we can see that cooperatives have a really important role in actually coordinating and encouraging the creation of ideas that are actually member-led, but actually working with members to actually validate that ideas work. Both they improve the environment, they work for members on farm or on orchard, and actually they are aligned with what the cooperative's business model needs in regards to kind of alignment with the macro trends around consumer needs, regulatory changes and the like. And then we've got this model where when we know they work, we've got the cooperatives are actually very effective in actually getting those ideas widely diffused by working again with members who are advocating and championing for ideas that are really well proven. At the same time, you've got that innovation process going on, and we've also got this hybrid process. We're not having a conversation about is it good for the environment or is it good for the business. Actually, we've got this hybrid development of practices. It's good for the business and it's good for the environment. And when we go back to kind of some of the discussions that are going on about how industry can help achieve sustainable development goals, how we're going to tackle these grand challenges, this is exactly the kind of collective action that we need. And this is how cooperatives are doing it. So what we're hoping is that out of our research are some useful things, both for industry and for our kind of like scholarly understanding of how organisations are going to contribute to a better society. On the one hand, we're starting to develop a really good toolbox of the knowledge-based mechanisms that cooperatives are using. And we've got some good detail about actually how cooperatives use them, why they use them, and how they adjust them for their different needs. And while our case studies are focusing on cooperatives who have done this already, it does offer some ideas for other cooperatives who are looking looking for some different ways of thinking. From a scholarly perspective, actually, we're actually showing how producer cooperatives are balancing business and sustainability, what that process looks like. And the third thing that's really important is actually we're starting to understand what are the conditions when cooperatives are positioned to actually support sustainable business. Because we're not saying that all cooperatives are in a position to do this, but we're starting to get a really good picture of, under these conditions, this is when the cooperative business model can be really powerful for achieving sustainable business. So that was my quick whirlwind of what we've been doing with our research. Thanks so much for listening to my pitch. I'm actually going to stop screen sharing now and hand over back to Ros, and I'm really happy to take remarks or questions.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm sure everyone found that your insights highly relevant, and what we've done is we've allowed some time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, can you just enter them into the chat function that's at the bottom of your screen, and I'll ask Lisa them on your behalf. What I was actually thinking, hearing from you today, is, Cooperative Business New Zealand, on behalf of our members, actually responded to the Productivity Commission's recent report, which was fairly critical of cooperatives' contribution to growth and GDP. I mean, how does your research shed light on that?
Well, I've read the Productivity Commission's report. I've read the response from Cooperative Business New Zealand. I've also seen the responses that some other scholars around the world have made. And I think my view is very similar to what has already been shared with the Productivity Commission, and it's that economic measurement of performance is a very 20th century way to assess the contribution of business to society. It actually is quite inconsistent with the government of the day's call for a much more holistic view of how we measure performance and well-being. While ours is not an economic analysis of the contribution that cooperatives make, what our findings show is actually the processes that cooperatives fund, that they coordinate, that the organisation of a cooperative does provide to its members. And in an economic measurement, I think a lot of that is lost. It also goes back to this idea that actually businesses exist in a wider system, and cooperatives have their own system. So actually you have to understand how that system is working together. And we know when it comes to dealing with some of the issues around that come with climate change, whether it's water use, land use, food production, we need systemic responses. And cooperatives are part of that systemic system, and our findings show that actually in certain conditions, cooperatives are well positioned to actually mobilise the kind of action that we need.
Oh, that's great. I've actually got a question here from Fonterra, and they've said their experience is very much consistent with your findings. The question is, many private or public companies might argue that they similarly help facilitate sustainability performance from their supplier shareholders. Can you provide any thoughts on the quantum of difference between co-ops and others?
Simon, thanks so much for that question. I don't have an answer at the moment. What I do know is that we need some more work that actually does some comparative analysis, so that actually compares like with like. I do know of a piece of research that's going on at the moment at Massey University that is actually doing that piece of work to actually look at how a cooperative and an investor-owned firm in one industry, actually how they compare, so we can actually start working that out. I think the traditional way that we would measure that is we would have an established measure. And at the moment, there's still a lot of debate how we're actually going to measure sustainable development. So I think we're a little way off being able to kind of quantify that. So the first step is going to be those comparative studies.
Right. Thanks for that. We've got another question here about entrepreneur-led startups are being seen as being more innovative, nimble and responsive to grand challenges. Can you qualify how well co-ops do respond to long-term challenges?
Oh, okay, so good question. Okay, so the assumption there about entrepreneurial cooperatives being nimble and quick speaks to a whole heap of literature or a whole heap of research we know about young firms being responsive. So I'm not sure that you can say that's because they're a cooperative or because they're entrepreneurial and growing fast.
Sorry, I'm just wondering if Louisa's question is more about not just cooperatives, but more in the general sense of entrepreneurial-led startups are being seen as being more nimble and innovative to the grand challenges. So I guess it's looking at the co-op versus that scenario.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
so I get the question. I understand the question now. So I think there are a lot of assumptions there. You know, there's a lot of research about entrepreneurial startups and their ability to be nimble, and that's often about their life cycle, the stage of their life cycle. Yes, they might be able to respond faster, but then they suffer all of the other issues of being a young firm, right? So they don't have the capability base, they're resource constrained, and they suffer from cash flow issues. So yeah, there are some characteristics that allow them to respond to the environmental challenges, but at the same time, they suffer from some very perennial issues that we know often are the reasons why entrepreneurial firms fail. What I would say is that what we are seeing at the moment is a lot of interest in what they're calling social enterprises or hybrid organizations, entities that are founded with both economic and social objectives. And often we see them in the not-for-profit space. You could say in many ways those are characteristics of co-ops, but there's clearly there's an interest in those kind of not-for-profit organizations. At the moment, the literature that's sitting with management scholars is showing that those have impact in their local environment, but they are not having wide-scale impact. So actually, there's a lot of questioning at the moment about the appropriateness as a model for getting wide-scale impact. So actually, this is why a lot of management scholars are now calling for more attention back onto cooperatives, because the cooperative model has shown that it can scale, at least at a country level, right? You know, we know there are very few cooperatives that have internationalized their cooperative model outside of their own borders. Usually they do that by kind of taking a more corporate approach. But we know that cooperatives can be effective at the country level. And some of those hybrid organizations that have a social agenda is struggling to get beyond their local environment. When I say local, I mean their city or their small region. Yeah. Thanks
for that, Lisa. I'm just aware that we're out of time. Have you got any final words you'd like to offer before we wrap up?
So in my slide deck, I have a last slide that has links to some of our published papers that are available in the public domain. And just letting everyone know that we've got some other work that's under review, and we're hoping it will be out later in the year. So I imagine that when the video is released, so will the PowerPoint slides. So do feel free to have a read of anything that captures your attention, and more than happy to have offline conversations if anyone wants to pursue conversations any further. Also happy for any pushback in terms of the will help us with our thinking, because you know, we're academics and this is our take. Really happy to hear from industry about how we refine and where we go next.
Well, thanks so much for your time today, Lisa. It was really great to hear about this topic. And what I would really love to do is take some of the good news stories that you're talking about in terms of co-ops taking the lead around innovation and working with their members to validate new technology, and then they're actually taking the lead also in sharing these insights with the broader sector group, whether they're co-ops or not. And I don't think that that's getting out there. So I think that would be a really big coup if we could start to talk a bit more about that. In terms of the audience, obviously you're all currently members of Co-op Business New Zealand. So you know, we're always trying to build our network and really want to make sure that we've got the opportunity to engage with your peers as well, and recognising that you all sit across multiple sectors, and that you do generate a significant proportion of New Zealand's GDP. It's really important that we do get these good stories out there. So thanks again, Lisa, and kia kaha, everyone.